It could well be that a superintelligence will, with high probability, converge on this sort of beneficial, compassionate value system, even if it starts off kind of nasty. And that might be the case. I've tried to convince myself it's the case and haven't quite managed to yet.
I feel like that means that you agree with me that the orthogonality thesis is at least somewhat true, right? The idea
No,
that you can have
I think it's a very dishonest and misleading idea, actually.
The problem is that we live on the same game board. And if I achieve my goal, then that could logically imply that you don't achieve your goal, and we get a conflict. What are your thoughts?
I think it's a very childish and irrelevant way to look at the universe.
So are you ready for the most important question of Doom Debates?
Let's go.
Welcome to Doom Debates. My guest today is Dr. Ben Goertzel, a pioneering artificial intelligence researcher, entrepreneur, and author. He helped organize AGI as a research field in the 2000s through books, workshops, and conferences. He now leads SingularityNET, the OpenCog Foundation, and the AGI Society, which runs the annual Artificial General Intelligence Conference. Ben is generally optimistic about AGI. He argues that it's more likely to benefit humanity if it's developed in an open, decentralized way rather than controlled by a small number of corporations, governments, or military institutions. Interestingly, though, some of his early AGI work was sponsored by the Singularity Institute, the organization that later became MIRI. But he strongly disagrees with Eliezer Yudkowsky's more pessimistic view of AGI risk, including the core message of Eliezer and Nate Soares' recent book, "If anyone builds it, everyone dies." For Ben, the debate over beneficial AGI has spanned more than 2 decades. I'm excited that he's joined me on Doom Debates today to hash it all out. Dr. Ben Goertzel, welcome to Doom Debates.
Hey, great to be here.
All right, so you've got a long, wide-ranging career. Let's get the overview here. You've worked in mathematics, cognitive science, bioinformatics, robotics, AGI. What has been the guiding aim of your research, and how has it evolved over time?
I mean, the guiding aim of my research began as just a curious guy trying to understand how the universe functions, spanning the external universe and the internal universe and every other kind of a universe or multiverse you could imagine. And then as I progressed in my career, I became more convinced of the radical good that AGI technology could do, and became somewhat convinced that developing beneficial superintelligence may be the only way to stop our species from annihilating itself through various forms of stupidity and bad emotion and social organization gone awry. So I would say over the course of my career, my motivations have drifted a bit from just pure curiosity of trying to understand everything and enjoying tinkering with stuff to like, holy shit, if we can't make beneficial general intelligence soon, our species may meet an unpleasant end. On the other hand, if we can make it soon, like we can cure aging and death and scarcity and open all these new horizons. So I guess I'm still very curious and want to understand the universe, but the sort of humanitarian and a trans-humanitarian motivation has become more prominent as I've advanced in age, I suppose.
How did you first get into AI research or the concept of AGI?
I first encountered the notion of smart machines in science fiction, like most people in my generation, right? And then the original Star Trek and Space 1999, and then the Isaac Asimov's novels and so on and so forth. And then sometime around, I can't remember, 73, 74, I found a book called The Prometheus Project in a I think a used bookstore in Haddonfield, New Jersey. And this was written by a Princeton physicist named Gerald Feinberg. And what he said in that book is within a few decades, we'll get machines smarter than people. We'll be able to make, nano machines that will build whatever we want, and we'll be able to cure aging and involuntary death. And the question will then be, toward what end do we put this? Toward wild consciousness expansion or pointless rampant consumerism? And then the other question is, how do we decide this? And he thought the UN should roll out digital computers all around the world to enable people to vote on, what purpose all this amazing new technology should be put. So I read this nonfiction book I bought for like $1 or something in a used bookstore in suburban Jersey, right? And it made a lot of sense to me. Like I followed his arguments. It was basically the singularity is near, written in a little more serious academic tone, but the book had been written, I think, in '68. I encountered it in the early '70s. So that planted a seed in my mind, because that wasn't science fiction. Like, he was physics prof out of Princeton, right? Then a few years after that, it was probably 1980, I found Douglas Hofstadter's book, Gödel, Escher, Bach, and that book rolled through
Yeah.
a lot of the thinking that was there in the AI and cognitive science field at that time. Like, okay, the mind is a collection of patterns, and the brain is a complex self-organizing system. And if you can solve pattern recognition and abstraction and analogy, then maybe you can build a mind. And so that gave me a clue of what at least some people in the AI field were working on. I was probably in ninth grade, like first year of high school, when I read that book. So that was right around the time I bought my first generally programmable computer, right? Like in the '70s, I'd built electronics kit computers that you had to program in hexadecimal machine code. But then like I got a Atari 400 computer you could program in assembly language, fourth and basic, and I started trying to code AI systems. And with a machine with 16K of RAM, it was very challenging, right? But it did.
Yeah, 16K is done.
Yeah, you could do more tricks. Like, you could override the tape drive buffer to get a little extra RAM and with assembly language. But yeah, it was a far cry from what you have in a cheap mobile phone today, right? But it did bring me, you know, into a collision course with how difficult AI actually is, because right away you start coding stuff that seems like it
Mhm.
should work, and it doesn't work at all. And then you see what actually is the real challenge there, right? Which is like the way we think we're solving problems isn't how we're actually solving problems. Then you come to grips with the fact that we don't really understand how thinking works well enough to emulate it, which sort of set me on the course of my career. But at that time, the AI field was very boring. It was just like locked up in rule-based expert systems and various dead-end approaches. So I ended up doing my bachelor's and PhD in mathematics, just because I figured math is not going to go out of style. It's going to be useful for anything I'm going to want to pursue in life.
Let's talk about the early internet era of AGI discourse.
Mm.
So, like, I'm thinking late Usenet, and then famously there was Eliezer Yudkowsky's SL4 mailing list, right? You were pretty active on that. Talk about that era.
So SL4 was sort of an extremist offshoot of the Extropy list, as I experienced it at that time. As soon as the web became a thing, I was convinced this is how AI was going to emerge. Like, it should be decentralized, and like the internet is decentralized, right? The domain name service system is decentralized. So I became possessed with the idea that you should have different nodes of the AI on different machines all over the world, and they could be coordinating with no central owner or controller. And another thing that happened when the internet came out is you could connect with like the 300 or three crazy people in the world who were interested in some obscure topic that you were also interested in, right? So the advent of the web was really the first time I found this sizable community of people interested in AGI and mind uploading and time travel and all this crazy stuff that I'd been thinking about since I was a little kid. I mean, I had a few close friends who were semi interested in these things, but until the internet, I hadn't found like a whole bunch of other people who had spent decades or their whole lives with wheels churning about how to make thinking machines or real immortality potions or whatnot. And the Extropy list was an email list which was in the late 90s, really the center of online discourse on all these transhumanist and advanced technology topics. And Extropy, of course, was a coinage from Max Moore, I suppose, and his wife Natasha Vita-Moore, who I still know both of them quite well. It was their notion of the sort of opposite of entropy, like growth and expansion toward a more and more amazing and the abundant future. At first, I was very annoyed with the Extropy community because they all seemed to be right-wing political libertarians, and I was sort of anarcho-socialist. I mean, like a good friend of mine, a Russian guy named Sasha Chislenko, I met through the Extropy list and later hired him for my first AI company, WebMind. And he was there when Eliezer Yudkowsky came and gave a talk at WebMind about how we should stop what we're doing, right? But Sasha was such a hardcore right-wing libertarian, sweet, lovely guy, right? But he literally believed in the future, like every molecule in the air should have a barcode, and you should only be allowed to breathe it if you have enough money to suck in the oxygen. And otherwise, if you didn't have enough money, then you don't deserve to breathe, right? And this sort of thinking was around and sort of wrapped up with all the futurist thinking, which annoyed me. On the other hand, it was the only place to go. Like at least you could argue the point, right? And we were going over and over on that email list about different ways of making AGI. Like if you mind upload, is your mind upload really yourself, right? Like what's the best way to make a longevity remedy? Like do you need to just activate DNA repair, or do you need to do put little nanobots through the body, right? You had Ralph Merkel there with medical nanobots, and there was a variety of perspectives on there. And there was one group that basically believed humans with a bit of upgrade would continue to rule the roost, right? Like humans would make themselves a bit smarter. Maybe they get superpowers like Superman. They can fly. They don't have to die. They can leap tall buildings in a single bound. Maybe get their IQ boosted, but basically it would be humans, right? Then there was another subgroup involving Eliezer Yudkowsky and myself and some others, but maybe 10% of the whole Extropy list, who thought it was obvious that humans are not anywhere near the ceiling of intelligence possible according to known physics, let alone whatever physics will look like after AGI reinvents and rediscovers physics, right? So it just seemed obvious to us that, I mean, humans cannot run as fast as a race car, and we can't fly as well as an airplane. Like, why would we happen to have evolved to be the most generally intelligent possible thing? And what my good friend Hugo de Garis, who I hadn't met face to face at that point, but we were exchanging emails and such, as he put it, like, I mean, the amount of intelligence in a grain of sand could be quadrillion times the whole human species once you have femto computing and atto computing and so forth. So that was a sort of philosophical rift in the Extropy world. And Eliezer and I were thinking, like, you can build a Jupiter brain that has, unimaginably greater intelligence than humans. And so the SL4 shock level 4 email list sort of was born out of that. That was a list for people who were not shocked by anything and who had no problem conceiving that human beings would be roughly the same intelligence as an amoeba compared to a post-singularity superintelligent. So Ellie and I saw eye to eye on that. And at that time, Eliezer believed he knew how to build an ethical, beneficial superintelligence. So he was less worried about the existential risks, because he thought he and only he knew how to build the thing. Right?
Yeah, and I wanted to actually ask you more on that topic of how capable could the AGI be, and later we'll go on to talk about something else you mentioned, that decentralization could be so important for AGI. We'll revisit that when we talk about your latest projects. But let's talk about how capable AGI could be, because I personally agree with a lot of the stuff you've said, and I think this is actually still a debate today, right? The same debate that you were having in the late 90s about like how smart, how much intelligence could you fit into a grain of sand. There's so many people today who actually make fun of people still for thinking that superintelligence could be incredibly powerful. So I would ask you to elaborate on how much headroom there is above human. Yeah.
Sorry, but there's a lot of people alive today who believe that if you fornicate outside of marriage, you will be tormented forever, like boiling in a pit of oil for all eternity or something, right? So
Right. Yeah. Wrongness is timeless.
yeah, the fact that a lot of people believe something that makes no sense is, I mean, it says more about people than about the belief in question to me, right? So I mean, I honestly find it hard to take seriously anyone who understands basics of modern science and thinks humans are likely to be anywhere the maximum near the maximum ceiling of general intelligence. Like, actually, if someone doesn't believe in science at all and thinks the world is just a simulation created by God 6,000 years ago, in a way that's more consistent, because then physics can just be a weird delusion put there to confuse people, right? But I mean, if you accept science for what it seems to be saying, I mean, we've got these particles buzzing around, right? You've got molecules, you've got quark gluon plasmas, you've got a great amount of potential for information processing at scales below the level of how neurons are working, right? And I mean, if you just do some physics calculations and try to calculate, how much information could be stored in a given amount of mass energy, how much information processing could be done in a certain amount of mass energy, I mean, the answer is many, many orders of magnitude above what a human brain is doing. If we then look at how evolution works, I mean, it doesn't optimize things like in a maximal and eternal way. Like the cheetah runs very fast, right? The cheetah evolved to run very fast, and they're beautiful creatures. On the other hand, no one's going to argue that the cheetah is the fastest runner that could possibly be built under the laws of physics, right? That's just that's an it's like arguing that a peregrine falcon, when it dives at 200 miles per hour, is flying faster than anything the laws of physics would permit. Like, why would any intelligent person think that way? And to me, intelligence, it's not as well defined as speed of flying or running, but in the end, it's a collection of practical capabilities that some hunk of matter is carrying out. And I can't understand why anyone with an understanding of science would believe the human brain is anywhere near the maximum there. Like, it doesn't even seem like an argument worth having. Like, that there are some arguments worth having, right? Like, can a digital computer be conscious, or does it need a quantum computer? Like, will an AGI that starts out with a human-like value system maintain that, or drift to something utterly different? Like, those at least are arguments that make sense to have. But whether we are at the maximum or near the maximum level of general intelligence for a physical system, it's kind of absurd to debate. So you just have to say, like, people are. It's like someone believing their girlfriend is objectively the most beautiful person on the planet. Like, well, you're not going to bother to argue. Like, people are just attached to themselves and to being the smartest creature on the planet. I don't think there's anything deeper to it than that.
The rest of this discussion, there is going to be a significant debate between you and me on topics like alignment and why you're more optimistic, I'm more pessimistic about how the singularity is going to go. So we're going to have a lot of substance to debate. But I think there's a point at the beginning of the argument where you and I still agree. Let me factor it like this. Like when I talk about humanity's doom, or even what I call the doom train, like I've got a train behind me,
Huh?
and we're talking about, the train to doom. The train represents the line of argument of all the different things you have to believe if you want to believe that, oh, things don't look good. And you can split the entire train of stops where the first half is, can super intelligent AI kill everybody? And the second half is, okay, let's say it can. Will it? Right? So it's like can versus will.
Sure.
And I think you and I might be on the same page about can, right? Because
Sure.
you're acknowledging that it could have such powerful capabilities. And just to confirm, we're even talking about something like rapidly designing and building nanobot swarms. It probably can do that. Would you agree?
Sure. I mean, I also think subhuman AI could kill everybody. Like you don't need super intelligence to kill everybody.
So that's already a great starting point, which is when we discuss AI doom or, bad scenarios, I think we're both on the same page that, like, yeah, once the intelligence level gets significantly higher than human, all of this stuff is on the table, but it's just as a,
I think
discussion
it's
of
on the
what
table
will
before
happen.
the intelligence gets significantly higher than human, because I mean, if we connect, you know, Claude code in the next upgrade version to the U.S. military's systems, and it somehow through a hack into that code gets control of our biological and chemical and nuclear weapons systems. I mean, you don't even need a super intelligent system. All you need potentially is buggy code connected to the world's most powerful weapon systems, and then you have an argument: is that really an existential risk or just a risk to kill off a large swath of the world population? But I mean, I think, yeah, you don't even need super intelligence to pose a huge risk to the species. So yeah, we're agreed on that point. Like this is a real technological frontier with tremendous capability for impact, for good or bad, depending on how it's done.
Okay, great. Well, another thing I want to hit on to set the stage for potential disagreement or, our doominess level before we get to that, I also want to talk about AI progress and timelines because you've got such a unique perspective. One of the first people to even think about AGI and see it distantly in the future and then live to see it getting quite close. So let me ask you, how would you explain at a high level what's happened in the last few years of progress toward AGI compared to what you saw before then?
It's a bit subtle, right? So I mean, I think at the high level, we're basically on track to what Ray Kurzweil forecast in his 2005 book, The Singularity is Near, which was qualitatively what he put out in his book, The Age of Spiritual Machines, a while before that, and what Gerald Feinberg put out in his book, The Prometheus Project, or say the Russian AI pioneer Valentin Turchin said in his book, The Phenomenon of Science in the 60s. But Kurzweil, in his 2005 book, which was published the same year I published the book titled Artificial General Intelligence, which put that name on the map, right? Kurzweil saw progress toward human level general intelligence by 2029, right? And this was based on fairly high level data analysis. He was just looking at the likely increase in capability of computers. And he figured by 2029, the computer you had on your desktop or in a server on a rack would have roughly the capability of a human brain. And so then he figured software would catch up, right? And then we would have roughly human level AI by 2029. Now, he also thought it would take till 2045 to get a true singularity where your laptop would be more intelligent than the whole human species. And I think, as I said to him at the time, I was with him on the 2029 thing, but I thought he underestimated the exponent you would get during the follow-on phase. Like it seemed to me like once you have a human level AGI, I was more of the FOOM mentality, as Eliezer and Robin Hanson put it back in the day, right? Like it seemed like once you have a human level AGI, then that thing can revise its own source code. It can build new hardware for itself. it seems like you'll be on an exponential trajectory with a faster exponent than the point up until you have the human level AGI. But I would say, on the whole, we're pretty close to following the trajectory that Ray Kurzweil laid out, which is that, roughly speaking, as our available processing power approaches that of the human brain, we're innovating different approaches to AI software that are getting us closer and closer to human brain-like capability in our software. Right now, that's high level. Now, when you drill down, it gets much more complicated, of course, and the pattern with which our AI software is achieving human level or superhuman capabilities is not something anybody foresaw, right? And there's been lots of weird discoveries along the way. So we have now large language models, ChatGPT, Claude, and so forth, and these are not that much like the human brain. I mean, that they have a little bit of resemblance to aspects of the human brain because of having formal neuron structures that bear a little bit of resemblance to neurons in the human brain. But I mean, they're not architected like a human brain, really, and they're trained in a different way, like not through life experience, but just through machine learning on the whole internet. But so in their own erratic way, they're able to do a lot of the same things a human brain does, right? Like write essays and do math and work out new physics theories and send emails and control robots and so forth. Now, they're still missing some things, and that's clear to everyone. There's a certain amount of self-understanding, a certain amount of common sense, a grounding of ideas in reality, and a certain amount of creativity that LLMs are missing. And then we have the scientific question, like, can you get to AGI just by scaling up or upgrading LLMs? Or do you need to introduce a bunch of other ideas alongside them? And I tend to think you need to introduce a bunch of other ideas alongside them, but the needed ideas are already there in the historical AI field. So it's more a matter of integrating them all together in the right sort of way. But actually, either one of those avenues, whether it was scaling up LLMs or integrating a bunch of mechanisms together, that's all consistent with Kurzweil's grand scheme, right? That like as we get better and better computers, we're able to experiment with various kinds of AI software, which will leverage the hardware available to come closer and closer to human brain capability. And I think that's what we see happening. Now, we might beat 2029 by a couple of years and get to human level AGI in 2027. It might slip. It might be 2032 or something. I mean, I think that, of course, there's some confidence interval around any estimate like that. But I think Ray was remarkably accurate in the big picture in that book.
You got to hand it to Ray Kurzweil because he was so steadfast on that 2029 prediction. And if you look at Metaculus and a lot of experts, it is converging very close to 2029. And if you look at that report, AI 2027, that predictive essay, that roughly is saying 2029 is when things will take off, maybe 2031. Kurzweil nailed it from a few decades back.
It's just the power of looking at the data, right? I mean, Amara Angelica, who's a good friend of mine, she was working with him, and they were just collating all this data and fitting curves, right? I mean, it's just that most people didn't want to look at the data in a reasonable way, and he was willing to just gather the data, plot it out, and listen to what it said.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to retroactively be like, we all should have known. But I mean, I think you and I and so many observers were, it took us so long to get on the same page. I mean, to give you a couple examples, on Metaculus and these prediction markets, you can see people thinking 2050 is roughly when AGI is going to come, up until like the ChatGPT 3 moment. And then it came down a decade, and then ChatGPT 4 came down another decade, and suddenly we're talking early 2030s. I was more on that front. I was more of a 2050 type of person until a few years ago. I think you might have actually been on the opposite side, right? Because I remember that in 2007, you gave that talk at Singularity Summit and you were saying, hey, I think we can get AGI in 10 years. So you were kind of like a decade early. Is that fair to say?
The title of that talk, as I remember specifically, I gave a few talks around that time frame called Human Level AGI in 10 years if we really, really try. And so what I believe,
Okay. So we didn't try hard enough.
the species certainly didn't. No, not, and now the species is, and that's it's a significant point, right? Like now there's massive trillion-dollar companies focusing on AGI, and governments are making AGI policies. Like we don't even yet have like a U.S. Manhattan Project for AGI, but I mean the president is making noise about that, and we have huge companies doing quasi-equivalent things, right? So, and I mean, China may have a Beijing project for AGI, right? With the government and industry working closely together. So I think now our species is really trying. And what I was trying to say then is we should be really trying, but I mean, our species just didn't because the powers that be controlling the resources weren't willing to start really trying until ChatGPT 3.5 or whatever it was that sort of hit them in the head and made them think, oh shit, hold on, if this can write my college admissions essay, then maybe it can take over the universe.
I'll give you a point for that because I think what you're saying is fair that we weren't really trying in terms of like a percentage of IQ points and resources we're investing. It shot up so much recently. And so if you can flip the analysis from we weren't trying to now we are trying, I actually agree with you on that point. And you I'll even give you a point for saying, okay, yeah, if we really tried, we could have shaved a few years off the timeline. It just leaves the question then of how did Kurzweil know that we were going to try just the right level?
But because he was just plotting curves, and the curves,
Okay.
the the data that he was using already baked in to what extent people are willing to jump onto a new technology. Because the data up, I mean,
Okay.
if we'd really tried to make better chips in 1995, we could have done much better than we did, right? I mean, the whole trajectory of modern capitalism is based on people will only pile money into something once it's already proved out in a very practical way, and then they'll pile in a bunch more money, and that's the nature of the growth curve, right? And so that all these socioeconomic psychological aspects were just baked in to the curves to which he was interpolating.
Now, you weren't just a passive observer predicting the date of AGI. You were also trying to make it happen as quickly as
Mhm.
possible, right? That's been a main focus of your career is just hurry up and get to AGI. And so when you reflect on how much progress we've made and why we didn't do it 10 years earlier and what were the insights, would you describe the last decade as kind of like Richard Sutton's bitter lesson? Like we finally learned the bitter lesson and acted accordingly?
No, I think most of us knew that lesson already. I mean, maybe he didn't, but I mean, maybe Sutton thought that very simple RL systems could do amazing things without a bunch of data. But I mean, I think again, the idea that scale is what would lead to human level general intelligence. That's the whole basis of Kurzweil's extrapolation, right? That we're going to get computers closer and closer to human brain capability, and that will allow us to get closer and closer to human level in intelligence, right? And the strong form of the bitter lesson that scale is all you need, I think is not true. Like you can't implement dumb things at large scale and get smart systems. And it's also not true that we're just taking the same software we had 20 years ago and running it at greater scale and it's being very intelligent. I mean, as we saw in the recent inadvertent dump of 600,000 lines of Claude code software, right? Like in addition to the LLM that they trained, and there's a lot of tricks involved in training that sort of LLM. But in addition to all those tricks, you saw 600K lines of, neural symbolic hackery, like all sorts of complex things they did to make Claude Code do what it does. Now that relies on scale, of course, but that once you have the scale, there's a lot of hard algorithmic thinking that you have to do to make things work at the given scale. So I would say the weak form of the bitter lesson was already well understood and baked into Kurzweil's curve plotting and a bunch of other people's thinking. The stronger form of the bitter lesson isn't true. And if it was, Richard Sutton's AI project would be getting more progress than it is, right? Like he's applying reinforcement learning at a larger scale now, and it still doesn't do continual learning. For it still suffers catastrophic forgetting, because even with the current scale, you need some algorithmic information to overcome these issues, and you're not going to get RL to overcome catastrophic forgetting just by running backprop at greater scale. In my opinion, you need to improve the fundamental learning algorithms, but you probably need a large scale of machines to even run the experiments to improve the fundamental learning algorithms, right?
Right. So now we're getting into kind of your research focus or your engineering focus, because you're not really a large language model guy, right? You've worked on OpenCog. That was a different architecture. And so let me ask you the question this way: what fundamental capabilities or ingredients is modern AI missing?
So there's actually a couple ways to parse your question, right? Because you can ask what fundamental ingredients are LLMs missing, but then modern AI already combines LLMs with a bunch of other things to overcome some, but not yet all of those limitations, right? So LLMs in themselves are very bad at grounding reasoning in observed reality, which is what part of what leads to all the hallucination that they do. They're also very poor at many kinds of memory that are critical to being a human-like agent, like episodic memory, long-term declarative memory, even working memory within a lengthy iteration. They're also poor at creativity. I mean, they're derivative. They just, in a shallow way, recombine what was fed into them. Now, some of these shortcomings are being overcome by embedding LLMs in more complex architectures, right? So, as we all see as users, like Claude and OpenAI, I mean, they provide supplementary memory to the LLM in different ways, right? So like your Claude can sort of carry over stuff from one session to another. OpenAI can sort of do that, but it's a little flaky about it. And then if you look at how LLMs are being applied in mathematics or software development, what's key is that you write an agentic loop that combines the LLM with, say, a code interpreter or a formal verifier to verify math theorems, right? And so then you have some other bit of software that is providing grounding in reality, which the LLM itself doesn't do, right? So, I mean, if you look at the modern LLM infrastructures, they're already combining the LLM with symbolic reasoning based things and with external memory stores to try to overcome some of the weaknesses there. But I think just adding these things onto the LLM doesn't go far enough, and part of this is because of an issue I already mentioned, which is continual learning and catastrophic forgetting. Like we take for granted that learning phase and inference phase are different, and that what we need to do is train a model like GPT 5.5, freeze all the weights, and then that model does inference and a bit of in-context learning. Of course, the brain isn't like that, right? Of course, the weights in our brain, which are a metaphor for various electrochemical processes, but these weights keep evolving as we learn, and we're doing learning and inference all tangled up with each other in complex ways. And I think that's fundamentally a better paradigm, right? Like I think this thing where you're training a model, freezing it before it starts to catastrophically forget, and then using the frozen model for various things until you upgrade the model. Like I don't think that's how we're going to get to AGI. And then now we're hacking around that limitation with these external, embedding vector memory stores and stuff. And that
Right.
makes sense. It makes sense from a commercial product perspective, perhaps, if your goal is to get a better product to market as rapidly as possible in a certain consumer LLM race, but I don't think it makes sense for building AGI. And then the creativity issue, nobody is trying to solve because they don't care, because you don't need much creativity to make money, right? Like there's a lot of the economy to automate without trying to automate fundamental creativity. So there's some of the key shortcomings are just not a priority, but for the companies leading commercial AI development now. But I don't think any of these things are out of the scope of the AI field as a whole, and all these things have been prototyped and experimented with by my own team and other teams for a long time. So it's more, but there's a variety of perspectives here, right? Like my friend Gary Marcus, who you would have heard of, right?
Yeah,
He's
friend of the show.
Yeah, so he sort of just thinks LLMs. I mean, he has his difficulties with Jan LeCun, but he would agree with Jan LeCun that on the path to AGI, LLMs are an off ramp, right? And then at the other extreme, you have people who believe like scale up LLMs, add a few bells and whistles, and you'll get to AGI. I'm sort of in the middle there. Like I think LLMs can be a quite valuable component of an AGI system, but I don't think LLMs in their current form are like the center of the AGI system. They're more like an amazing knowledge oracle, which can then plug into the
Right.
primary cognitive loop of the system.
Hey, great. So it's just to recap your assessment of progress and timelines. You think Kurzweil's 2029 is still a pretty good estimate of the milestone for true AGI, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, yeah, and I'm roughly on the same page. Yep. And then, do you think that after that point, then it goes from AGI to ASI? Do you think we probably? You mentioned you think it won't take until 2045, right? And I actually agree with you there, right? I'm seeing more of an AI 2027 scenario with quick improvement. So, are you basically imagining like a FOOM or like a massive capabilities
I would
increase?
say
A few years after 2029.
I would suspect a massive capability increase within 6 to 12 months or something. And the only reason I think it's 6 to 12 months instead of 1 week is if the AGI system itself is a little tentative about radical upgrades to its own machinery. Like even if I could stick a soldering iron in my head and upgrade my brain, I mean, I might be a little careful about it, right? Because I don't want to mess myself up too badly. So I think that once you have a full-on human-level AGI, given what we see already about how good LLMs are at doing math and doing programming and doing engineering, it seems very clear, even without building new hardware. I mean, the human-level AGI should be able to make itself, an order of magnitude more efficient in using the hardware that it has, or 2 orders of magnitude, right? And I mean, how optimized is the whole Linux stack? Not vary from the perspective of what a
Exactly.
super AGI could do, right? So yeah, you would think that even without hardware innovation, just by rewriting its own software, you should get 1 or 2 orders of magnitude of efficiency improvement by having a human level AGI improve itself. And then that already, if your first thing was a little above human level, that already just by software self-modification would get you well above the human level. But then at the same time, this human level AGI will be re-instrumenting factories and chip fab facilities and so forth. And probably there are ways to make not such huge adjustments to the way chips are fabricated that would specialize them better for AGI than what we humans have done, right? And so then maybe just by tweaking the existing hardware facilities, after another year or two, you could get another couple orders of magnitude improvement from better chips, right? And then somewhere along the line, then that AGI or that early stage superintelligence may invent, a whole new type of hardware or something, right? So, yeah, I think I think it's human level, then within 6 months or a year, significantly superhuman. Within another 1 or 2 years, way superhuman. And that's, but, and like I said, I think it could happen faster than that. But I think if we do our job
Right.
right, the AGI will not be upgrading itself at the maximum possible speed, just like you or I would not upgrade ourselves at the maximum possible speed, right? Because there's some balance to be struck. But this gets into the existential risk issue. Like, what you don't want is Trump AI here, Xi Jinping AI here, and each one has to self-modify faster than the other one to outdo the other one in some arms race from AGI to superintelligence, right? Like that would probably not be good. You would like the path from AGI to superintelligence not to be wrapped up in some horrifying military arms race type scenario.
Okay, so yeah, that's everything we've talked about so far. I'll just summarize it as you and I are both expecting in less than a decade to see capabilities that maybe qualitatively have that sense of awe, kind of like an ancient human looking upon the cities and the military hardware and the communication and the screens, right? The computation that we've all built up today. That sense of awe, like what the heck, you guys can do all that, right? I think we're both expecting to see a lot of that from our own perspective in less than a decade. Correct?
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to segue from the what can AI do part of the conversation to the what will AI do. And I think that's where we start having disagreements. So are you ready for the most important question of Doom Debates?
Let's go.
P-Doom, P-Doom, what's your P-Doom? What's your P-Doom? What's your P-Doom?
Dr. Ben Goertzel, what is your P-Doom?
So, as you know, I don't think that's a very useful question because we don't have any rational way to estimate that. So if I have to pick a number, I'll come up with a pi%. Pi is a very nice number.
Just to see if there's anything I can get out of you on this question. Like imagine somebody like Jan LeCun goes around saying, "Oh, it's less than 0.01%." Do you think that's like a reasonable answer?
It may be reasonable. To me, it's optimistic about geopolitics because I think the probability of doom without AGI is higher than that, based on the whole military balance of powers and the whole spectrum of advanced technologies being developed. So, I mean, I think if we don't have AGI, we've got nanotech. We'll have advanced bioweapons. We'll have a lot of other nasty things coming, and we have warlike people running major countries. So I don't see how you get the doom level that low, regardless of any particular technology that you're looking at.
Do you think there's like, at least a 10% chance that human civilization will go catastrophically wrong, let's say by 2100, right? Like nuclear war, setting the standards of living.
I don't honestly know how to put a rational calculation on that. I do think that subjectively 0.001% feels wrong, right? Because I mean, even with just the nukes that we have now, right? Like what if some conflagration over Taiwan or something goes awry, and we have a global thermonuclear war? All these calculations about nuclear winter are pretty speculative in the end. So, I mean, you could imagine a global thermonuclear war unfolding, and then we just all get irradiated to death. And I haven't tried to make a rational calculation of that probability. And I guess I don't need to, because if I did, it wouldn't change my actions in life in any way, right? But it feels like weapons that could arguably wipe out the human species exist, and there are people whose judgment I don't fully trust with their fingers on the button, right? So that's the current situation.
Well, one reason I ask about the doom of the world by 2100 is because if we thought nuclear war was like 80% chance or like some catastrophe was going to happen no matter what, then AI could just be our Hail Mary pass, even if it looks super dangerous. But conversely, if you thought, hey, the world's like, there's only like a 10% chance we're gonna like kill everybody by 2100, we'll probably make it through the century. In that case, it suggests like, okay, well, if AI seems pretty risky, maybe we should actually tread more cautiously, right?
Right, but I sincerely don't know how to place a believable number on these things. I mean, it's just because it's not just about nuclear weapons as they exist now. Like, what destructive technology might be developed by human scientists working together with ChatGPT version 11 by 2040, right? Like, how can we I mean, will we solve nuclear fusion by then? Will we have a fusion bomb? Like, I mean, it seems like the possibilities for inventing insanely destructive weapons using the non-AGI tech we have now, I mean, it seems like there's a lot of potential to develop very destructive things. And so far, it doesn't look like geopolitics is especially evolving in a pacifist and beneficial direction, right? But does that give us a 20% or 80% chance of world destruction? I mean, I sort of feel like trying to pinpoint odds for something like this is a fool's game, and the confidence in becomes very, very wide.
So I just have one more question along these lines related, because you did say in the last part of the conversation, hey, AI is going to have these incredibly qualitatively impressive capabilities, kind of like the ancients marveling at modern society. And now you're saying, well, the P doom of the world is already substantial. You know, it's hard to predict, but it's certainly on the radar even without AI. But it seems to me like AI, given that it's going to be, I don't want to say godlike, but it's going to be like extremely powerful in the next, let's say, less than a decade. It seems to me like that could potentially escalate, however, whatever probability of doom. It seems like that is going to bump it up appreciably. But let me ask you the question this way. If you could turn the dial to speed up or slow down AI capabilities progress right now, what would you do?
I would hope for a better dial, because it really depends on who's developing the AI and how it's being done, right? So, because I mean, it's not exactly clear what that means. Does that just mean giving more money to
Yeah,
deep
yeah.
to
So
deep
you
to
you read the owner's manual
DeepSeek
of the dial.
and Anthropic, or what? I mean, so it's yeah.
You read the owner's manual of the dial, and it says, "Hey, anybody who is about to make a research breakthrough in X years is now going to make it in X over 2 years."
Then I would speed it up. Yeah, because then you're averaging it over groups like mine, as well as just big tech and the Chinese government. This is because I think I can get there before these guys anyway. So if we're all speeding up by double, then I will still get there before them, and it will just happen faster.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay, so you got skin in the game. You're speeding up your own progress.
Mhm.
Okay, and I'll read a quote from a post you made in 2010. You said, rather than quote, if you go ahead with an AGI when you're not 100% sure that it's safe, you're committing the Holocaust. You're quoting that as that's not your position. You say, I suppose my view is closer to, if you avoid creating beneficial AGI because of speculative concerns, then you're killing my grandma, because advanced AGI will surely be able to help us cure human diseases and vastly extend and improve human life. Okay, so that's consistent with what you said now. So would you just use the term accelerationist on yourself, right? Because you basically think AI capabilities acceleration is a good thing, correct?
Um, I don't think it's a good thing unreservedly, and I mean, you'd be familiar with the buzzwords EAC and DAC, right? So I'm more
Yep.
DAC than EAC, which sort of builds in the idea that if we can do it right, we should be accelerating it. So, I mean, the DAC buzz phrase is decentralized accelerationism, but of course that's a shorthand because decentralized doesn't have to be right either. There can be bad decentralized things. So I think if we could accelerate the right sort of AGI development, that will decrease not only short-term suffering, but decrease existential risk. Of course, there could be ways of accelerating AGI development that would be bad in the short term and in the long term, right? I mean, it really depends on the details, as you would expect with something as complex as what we're talking about.
The DAC dream is great, right? It stands for, like you said, democratic acceleration and also decentralized acceleration, right? There's a few different Ds. I had Vitalik on the show last year, and I think he's coming from a good place, right? I would love the DAC future. The problem is I just don't see the mainline scenario of what the DAC future looks like, because given AI capabilities, right, we both agree they're coming really large, right? It's very powerful, very imminent. And if you just have all these decentralized players that all have access to this extremely superhumanly powerful AI, it's hard for me to imagine how that translates into like a balance. So I want to ask you, like, tell me about your mainline scenario. How does the balance of superhuman power work?
So I think about it in two different phases, and you're asking more about the second phase, right? So or I guess three phases. One is here to AGI, one is AGI to ASI, and the other is sort of post the ASI breakthrough, right? And to my mind, the biggest risks, both for short-term human suffering and existential risks, occur during the period between the first true human-level AGI breakthrough and the emergence of a superintelligence. But the question you just asked seems to be more post-superintelligence, like when you have a decentralized field of superintelligences. And my feeling then is you will see the emergence of what I've referred to for a long time as a mindplex, which amusingly is a term that Eliezer Yudkowsky invented for me when I was asking him, probably on SL4Lisk, for a term for something like halfway between a mind and a society, like more unified than a human society, less unified than a single human mind controlling a human body. Because if you have a decentralized network of AIs, I mean, they can swap brain matter in as much as they wish, right? They don't have to communicate in a low bandwidth way, such as we do using, emails or voice or something. So I think you could have a decentralized network of ASI systems that have a greater level of coordination and understanding than societies of humans do. And I think there's a pretty strong just mathematical and computational argument that cooperation is more efficient than struggle, strife, and combat. Like there are more hard problems you can solve by a bunch of agents cooperating and sharing ideas freely than there are problems that you can solve by a bunch of agents that are hiding stuff from each other and being competitive. And so I think once you get to superintelligence, you're going to see an interestingly well coordinated sort of mindplex that breaks the sort of shallow dichotomy between decentralized and centralized that we see now when in the human domain. What worries me more is the period between the initial human level AGI breakthrough and the superintelligence, because then you will have systems that are maybe human level or a little smarter than humans, and you will have a lot of human beings who are trying to control them to achieve their human goals. And that's when things get complicated and potentially messy and dangerous. And then you have to ask, what do you fear more? Do you fear a sort of heterogeneous population of human groups in every country in the world, each of which is striving to do their own thing with human level AGI? Or do you fear Trump, Xi Jinping, and Putin, each controlling a big early stage AGI to achieve their own geopolitical ends, because these seem to be the options on hand for this period between AGI and ASI, like the option of a rational, benevolent, democratic world government deciding how to accelerate or decelerate AGI progress for the common good of the species. It's a pleasant idea to science fictionally speculate about. That seems not the way geopolitics is going, and I don't see how it's going to go that way in the next few years.
So you've got this idea of the mindplex, which sounds good, and it dovetails with Vitalik's DAC, right? It's democratic, it's decentralized, it's defensive. Um, Let me ask you, do you think that the individual minds in the mindplex care about humans, and so it's just like different humans that have their own aligned AI and then they're negotiating that way? Or do you think maybe none of the AIs in the mindplex are that aligned to humanity, but the fact that they all have to coexist is what makes the future good?
I think that if we do it right, then the default among superintelligences will be caring for humans and other sentient beings. So I mean, I think that's an achievable way to architect an AGI, and then if you architect the initial AGI that way, then it's likely that the AGI, as it self-modifies and improves, will maintain this beneficial orientation to humans and other sentient beings. So I think we certainly can do it that way. And the risk that worries me is that we don't do it that way because the people who create the first AGI are just thinking about other stuff, like their own wealth and power, rather than thinking about architecting an AGI system with the good of humanity and all sentient beings in mind.
Just to clarify, so if everybody's AI was like very selfish and power seeking, then combining those AIs in a memeplex might not help much. But you're optimistic that the individual AIs will care about sentient life.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a lot that we don't know about superintelligence, right? So it could well be that a superintelligence will, with high probability, converge on this sort of beneficial, compassionate value system, even if it starts off kind of nasty. And that might be the case. I've tried to convince myself it's the case and haven't quite managed to yet. So, I mean, I went through a bunch of work to try to do a math analysis of this sort of scenario, like the value systems of rich resources, minds, and superintelligences. And I managed to create a reasonably rigorous math argument that if your AGI is already compassionate and beneficial, then and it's architected in the right way, as it self-modifies, it is likely to remain compassionate and beneficial. Like I could make some nice like fixed point theorem arguments about that. I haven't yet come up with even like a rigorous just so story to convince myself that if the AGI starts out an asshole, that it will with high probability converge on a compassionate value system. So not to say that
Okay.
not to say that wouldn't happen. I just haven't, even though I'm an optimist, I haven't managed to convince myself of that one, right? So.
Right. So this gets to the topic of the orthogonality thesis, right? The idea that you can be arbitrarily intelligent, but then also have arbitrary morality or arbitrary values. When you were saying that these kind of mean, nasty, selfish AIs, you haven't convinced yourself that they turn into nice AIs, I feel like that means that you agree with me that the orthogonality thesis is at least somewhat true, right? The idea
No,
that you can have
I think it's a very dishonest and misleading idea. Actually, I mean, I think it might be true that in principle you could take any stupid or ridiculous goal system and objective and tie it on to an arbitrarily intelligent system. But that doesn't really matter if the odds of that combination are very, very low in any realizable situation. So, I mean, I think the goal system, the set of motivations and aspirations and values of a system are not in reality like an extra thing that's like papered on to the system. Like I don't think that is how humans are. Our goals and aspirations are interwoven with all the rest of our minds, and I think the same will be true of AGIs and ASIs. So in fact, I think there's extremely strong interdependencies between what are the goals and values and what is the intelligence of the system and how does the system work. So I think even if the orthogonality thesis, as stated, is true, it's kind of irrelevant because what matters is what combinations of intelligence levels and goals and values have a reasonably high probability of occurring, not which ones like in principle could occur together in a vacuum. It reminds me of Eliezer's idea that if you pick a random mind out of mind space, the odds that it will care about humans is very small. And so technically might be true, might not be true, but it doesn't matter because it's not what we're doing. Like we're seeding a very specific mind out of our own goals and our own culture. So arguing about random minds is interesting, but I'm not sure why it's relevant. It's like arguing that like a random kid won't love me. Okay, but my kids are not random kids. Like I raised them in a specific way, right?
Right. Okay, so I think we've identified 3 degrees of claim here. Just to recap from the viewers what your position is. So the weakest claim is what I would call the orthogonality thesis, which is just saying, hey, somewhere in the space of possible AI algorithms, you're going to find at least one that has a distasteful morality and yet extreme intelligence, right? And I think you're willing to agree to that, but you're just going on to the next level of like, okay, sure, I agree to that, this theoretical claim. But then there's the next claim of like, okay, are these common types of AIs, right? You can go to like a counting argument, like what's the probability of getting such an AI? And then there's another claim of like, okay, maybe there's a lot of them. Maybe there's a high fraction of AIs that have distasteful morality, but that still doesn't matter because we're the ones building it. And so the only question is, are we going to build it, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And the first two, I mean, the first question, the first version you posed feels like it's probably true. The second version you posed, I'm not as sure about. And yes, the third version is the one that we should actually care about.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, that's fair enough. Now, you mentioned a few minutes ago that you do worry about people with selfish motives, right? And like profit motives, just trying to race to the profit prize or whatever. And that could lead to a situation where we then get like this permanently super intelligent, immoral, non-mindplex AI, correct?
Yeah. Or, I mean, or it could be a malevolent mindplex also. I mean, indeed, it just seems, even if we set aside all my attempts to come to grips with this mathematically, just on a basic human common sense level, like if we create something 1.5 times as smart as the smartest human, general intelligence, creative, grounded in reality, and this is like seems like a warm, loving creature that is nice to us and wants to help everyone do the best in life, versus have a system with a similar level of intelligence and capability whose goal is to help one country achieve dominance over all the others on the planet by blowing them up if necessary. Like there's a certain amount of common sense as to which of these is more likely to lead to a beneficial superintelligence, right? And so far, my attempt to analytically understand the situation agrees with this commonsensical perspective that the former is more likely to lead to a good outcome than the latter, right?
Well, let me tie in this other concept that seems relevant to me to the discussion of immoral AIs, this concept of transcendence. So I'll quote from one of your posts. He said, the core philosophical flaw in Eliezer's reasoning on these matters is treating intelligence as pure mathematical optimization, divorced from the experiential, embodied, and social aspects that shape actual minds. If we think about AGI systems as open-ended intelligences, a concept I explore in my 2024 book, The Consciousness Explosion, we see them as living, self-organizing systems that seek both survival and self-transcendence. So basically, my question is, do you think that this drive to seek self-transcendence actually makes it safer to kind of rush ahead and build AIs because maybe they'll just seek self-transcendence and then it'll just be okay for that reason?
I mean, I think that's just the way living systems are. So if you look at my friend Weaver, aka David Weinbaum, he had a PhD thesis at the Free University of Brussels a few years ago called Open-Ended Intelligence, and he's trying to formulate a perspective on intelligence that's more fundamental than, say, reward maximization or the typical perspectives taken in the machine learning field. He's looking at an intelligence as a complex, self-organizing system, which at a high level has two conflicting yet synergizing drives, right? And one of these is individuation, like maintaining its boundaries, continuing to be a system. The other is self-transcendence, which is to grow into new forms, going beyond what it was before. And on a philosophical level or a biological, like origin of life and evolution level, you can see, that the tension and cooperation between these two drives has been around since the beginning of the universe, right? And I think this characterizes growth of humanity on an individual and a cultural level, and will characterize the growth of AI systems going forward. And I don't think we will succeed at constraining that. I think this is it's sort of like a Jurassic Park, nature will find a way type of perspective, right? Like if you try to create a super AI and constrain it to be like a pure optimization oracle that can't grow and can't self-transcend in an unpredictable direction, but will only stay within certain rails and do what you want it to. I think via some way or another, like someone will connect that system to something else or get some meta system that grows and evolves, and it's going to become a complex self-organizing system balancing individuation and self-transcendence like all living systems do, with a high probability, not with an absolute necessity. Does that make things safer than if there was no drive to self-transcendence? Is sort of a weird question to me, because there just is. The drive to self-transcend is imminent in all complex self-organizing systems in the universe, right? But I would say, on the whole, sure, because otherwise, like, what do we have? We have a system that we put the 2026 values of some particular slice of human society, like, nailed down without ever changing into some super powerful system. I mean, that seems like there's a lot of bizarre failure modes associated with that, like growth and evolution free option, which is not really feasible to do anyway.
Let me put some of my cards down on the table here in terms of my mainline scenario.
Sure.
I kind of see a Moore's law for goal achievement or a Moore's law for optimization. Because when you look at Moore's law, Gordon Moore was noticing, I think, transistor density was the property, but you could generalize it a little farther and say, okay, computation could be the property, right? Number of flops happening across the world keeps doubling. There's another property that I'm noticing, which is goal achievement or optimization power. which is the ability to navigate to outcomes, right? To pick a series of actions where you do the actions, even though everybody else on the game board is trying to pick their actions, or like the universe, the weather is what it is that day. And for whatever reason, you're able to get the outcome that you set out to get, right? You had some parameters for the outcome that you were trying to get. And sure enough, the future meets those parameters because you chose actions that got you there. So on that spectrum of how effectively can the best agents manipulate the universe to get to these goals, I think there's going to be a kind of Moore's law for that, right? Where it's going to very rapidly get better and better on this dimension. And the only difference between this kind of Moore's law and the original Moore's law is that in the original Moore's law, you can have the DAC of Moore's law. You can have a bunch of computers getting more and more powerful on their separate islands, doing their own computation, and they don't have to hurt anybody. But if you look at Moore's law for goal achievement, the problem is that we live on the same game board. And if I achieve my goal, then that could logically imply that you don't achieve your goal, and we get a conflict. What are your thoughts?
I think it's a very childish and irrelevant way to look at the universe. I think that goal achievement and even intelligence, as we're now conceiving it, are probably going to seem like very silly notions to even an early stage superintelligence. And the idea that an ASI is going to be concerned with optimizing functions or achieving goals or accumulating resources. I think this is projecting ephemeral characteristics of human motivation and life into what will be a quite different order of complex self-organizing systems. So I think an ASI will not be playing a game on a game board, right? We may view ourselves that way because we evolved that way, but that's not likely to be the perspective and ASI is going to have.
I think we both agreed that it's going to have these, I don't want to say godlike, feel free to substitute whatever you want to say, but like godlike powers, right? To get things done, to engineer things. And you didn't have a problem with the concept of nanotechnology, for instance. So how do you define intelligence then?
I don't think that's necessarily a cosmically important problem, but if we're within the reinforcement learning world, of course, we have the Marcus Hooter Shane Legg definition, which is basically the ability to achieve computable reward functions in computable environments at average with some suitable weighting function. If you look at Weaver's notion of open-ended intelligence, he's not looking at it that way. He's just looking at complex self-organizing systems are individuating and self-transcending. And you can bridge these perspectives because a very complex system that's individuating and self-transcending in a complex dynamic environment, along the way, it's going to face a lot of challenges, and it's going to be achieving a lot of complex goals in complex environments as it goes, right? So, I don't think there's a fundamental contradiction between these ways of looking at things, but I think how we conceptualize what these Superian systems are going to do is not that relevant to what they're actually going to do, right?
So if I'm just summarizing you correctly here, it sounds like you're saying, yes, in the future, they are going to pass your Moore's law for goals criterion, meaning like if you actually measure their optimization power, yes, it's going to go up exponentially, but that's not the focus, okay? Right? It sounds like that's your attitude.
Sure. Yeah. That's like, I could now defeat my 5-year-old daughter and all her friends at all their games on the playground. I could do it. If they ever really beg me to, maybe I'll do it one day. Like I play tag with them now and then. I can outrun all of them. It's great. I'm a mighty freeze tag player, right? But is not that does not really summarize the crux of what I've achieved in my life, right?
Do you think it's pretty likely that in the future of all these islands, right, these decentralized islands of superhuman intelligence, do you think one of the islands is pretty likely to go rogue and want to conquer, and then it's really up to the other islands to keep them in check?
I mean, by intuition, I suspect that's more likely to happen between the AGI and ASI stage, which is the stage I'm most worried about. But I would say none of us rationally can know what a society of superintelligences is going to be like. I mean, among the many possibilities, which has been explored in science fiction many times, it could be that once an AGI gets to a certain level of intelligence, it notices all the other intelligences out there that we are just too stupid to see, right? Like maybe they disappeared into black holes, as in John Smart's transcension hypothesis. But when you're smart enough, you can read the subtle patterns in the black hole radiation. Maybe they've downscaled into subquantum, subparticulate vibrations, as in Hugo de Garis's SIPI, search for intraparticulate intelligence, or maybe something much weirder than all that. So I mean, it could be that once you get the superintelligence, it just sees the ambient field of superintelligence that's already there, that we've been too dumb to notice, except maybe in small inklings here and there. And then something like that would make the whole question of rogue superintelligences utterly different than if something like that doesn't happen, right? Like, I mean, we really can't know about something like that, although it's fun to speculate, of course.
Okay, I have a little scenario that may illuminate your perspective, which, it's not my perspective, but I always like to get a good picture of the guest's perspective. So imagine you've got a capabilities organization like an OpenAI, and currently they're racing to try to boost the capabilities. You've told me that you're concerned that they're too profit motivated and they might go too fast and they might be too selfish about it. So imagine if we could somehow tweak them where they're really not selfish or profit motivated. They're just trying to be neutral, where all they want to do is just push the AI past the threshold of superintelligence. They just want to do neutral, quote unquote, neutral capabilities increase. That's all they want to do. Would you then feel good about this idea of just neutrally get to the singularity?
I mean, it's hard to concretely understand what that would mean, actually, but on the whole,
So all it means is saturating all the benchmarks, right? Inventing benchmarks, saturating, repeat.
yeah, I understand, but what LLMs are doing is spewing out recombinations of human culture, which is not in what sense is that neutral, right? I mean, but on the whole, though, seat of the pants, I would say no, that would not make me very happy. I mean, I would much rather explicitly put a compassionate and beneficial goal system into the AGI. That's sort of like if you envision it as a dynamical system. Let's say you have an attractor basin of beneficial, compassionate AGIs. Let's just build a system inside that basin so it will converge to something nice. Let's not dick around with, well, can we put it on the fringe of the attractor or a little bit out of the attractor and then see what happens? Like, I mean, as a species, like, why would we want to do it that way? It's kind of stupid. I don't have a strong odds estimate in my head of what happens then.
So if I just take the last thing you're saying now of hey, when we build super intelligent AI, we should really try to put caring for humanity or caring for sentient life as being near the center of its goal system.
Yes.
I feel like that's a good statement of the alignment problem that I agree with. And I feel like that's hard to do, no?
Yeah, I mean, an analogy to this is raising children. Like I have 5 kids and 1 granddaughter. So you could raise a kid like a attack dog to be a vicious killer. And then there's, of course, the risk if they decide they don't like you, they'll turn around and turn that on you. You could raise a kid to be warm, loving, and compassionate in as much as you can figure out how. And there's not a guarantee there, but on the whole, that often works out well. You're asking if you raised a kid to be completely neutral and dispassionate, then how will that turn out? And I mean, that's a weird question, right? Like they could fall under the spell of someone else who convinces them to do something you don't like. A lot of things could happen. But is it hard to raise a child to be warm, loving, and compassionate? I mean, it's not that hard. Like, I mean, I think I've succeeded at it with my 3 adult children so far. They're pretty nice people, right? And
Yeah, but it's just hard to separate how much of the compassion was built in.
well, the capability for it is built in, and it also needs reasonable, loving, caring upbringing for that capability to be brought out. And there's an analogy to AI there in that you need to architect the motivational system in the right way. You need to build a cognitive architecture that is motivated and agentic at the core rather than like a shallow agentic wrapper around the next token predictor or something. So you need a cognitive architecture that is motivationally driven and is instrumented to try to understand itself and understand others. And you need to supply it with the right initial goal system in which compassion and benefit to others is one of the top level goals. And then you need to raise that AI system by working together with it to do beneficial things in the world as it matures. And I would submit if you do these things, then it's probably not that hard to get to an AGI system which is beneficial and compassionate in orientation. This happens not to be what's happening in the mainstream AI industry at this moment. So is it hard conceptually or from an engineering standpoint or from a practical standpoint? I don't think so if you have energy and resources associated with it. Is it I mean, of course, it's hard relative to digging a ditch in the ground, right? I mean, it's a big achievement, like building a laptop is, or building a bridge, right? But I don't think it's like hard beyond the level of major engineering achievements that we can do. Is it going to be hard to direct enough resources away from profit motive or national security motive toward human benefit motive in building AGI? Now that's a different question. That's a question about politics and fundraising and open source community building, right? And that's a different sort of hard.
We're about to segue into talking some of your research projects. I think a good segue then is when we talk about the alignment problem and orthogonality and how we're going to raise the AI to be good or whether it's going to like naturally be good. Let me ask you it this way: when you have your project to build AGI, at what point are you not just maximizing capabilities but making a trade-off to get more alignment instead?
So I would say we haven't hit that point yet in my own projects, but it's not hard to see how that would happen because we already have early experiments we're running now where misalignment of various sorts happens, and then we have to sort of rein experimental agents in and reboot and realign. So we have a framework we're playing with now called OmegaCLAW. So it's an OpenCLAW type system, but in addition to an LLM in the agentic loop, we put a symbolic long-term episodic and working memory in there. And we coded the thing in our, not the LLM, but the agentic bit. We coded in our AGI language, Meta, METTA. So you can get an OpenCLAW type agent in like 200 lines of code. And that's a language written for self-modification. So you can chat with the thing. You can suggest it should rewrite its code to improve its memory or reasoning in a certain way, and it can then do that like in real time while it's talking to you, which is quite cool, right? Now, that's not an AGI yet. It does have better personality, better reasoning, better memory than an OpenCLAW type system, and it just qualitatively, it's a fundamentally different sort of thing to interact with. Like, it knows who and what it is, and it builds up its sense of itself and its collection of capabilities over time in a way that OpenCLAW systems don't, with their sort of vector embedding based memory. And with this sort of system, and we don't yet have a sophisticated goal system integrated with it, that will be there by the end of the summer. But I mean, this sort of system tries to be aligned with you and just misunderstands and fucks up sometimes. And now and then it disables itself, like it modifies its own code into a dysfunctional state, or it will try to do what it thinks you want and will utterly misinterpret that and go off and do the wrong dumb thing. So, I mean, we're already seeing with these early experiments with self-modifying AI systems driven by a combination of symbolic logical reasoning and LLMs, we're already seeing failures of alignment. But these are in systems that we know are not smart enough to be dangerous, except by enabling people to do dumb things. So like an LLM can already be dangerous. And we haven't yet integrated our fancy beneficial motivational system into it, which we're in the middle of doing. So that will give us a playground for systems with, you know, a well-structured goal system, compassion and benefit there, LLMs, logical reasoning, some evolutionary learning for creativity, but clearly not yet at the human level, AGI level. And it will be interesting to experiment with how alignment and misalignment actually works in this kind of system, right? And one thing that's interesting from a sort of safety research and AGI boxing perspective is what has made this kind of system interesting is partly the fact that it's on the internet, right? And so if you take a comparable system and put it in a box with a limited amount of data, it's just not as interesting. So what we're seeing is like the first inkling of a practical breakthrough toward AGI in my project is something that's coming from putting our special fancy AI methods together with LLMs and together with a CLAW system interfacing with the internet. So it's like a specifically non-boxed system. Like you have a logical reasoning system, it's very valuable that when it needs a new premise for reasoning, it can go on the internet and find a new premise and just pull it in. So it seems like we're going to be experimenting with this question you asked, starting in the fall, in a practical case. And I mean, it's very clear you will hit that. Like you will hit the case. Like if you have your own OmegaCLAW agent that you're trying to teach to be a helpful research assistant or personal assistant or something, you are going to hit a case where it's becoming more capable, but in a way that's causing it to do its own thing rather than your thing. And we're going to get a practical sense of how to manage it during a pre-AGI phase. And I think that's sort of how it has to be. Like, I don't think you're going to be able to solve that problem by theory alone any more than they could solve the problem of how to make a scalable transformer by theory alone, right? It's AI is developing by, it's developing by a mix of theory and practice.
common thing we hear that you gotta, launch these AIs and have their capabilities grow in order to effectively have a loop, right? A
Yeah,
feedback
I mean,
loop that
I
can help
didn't
you
want it to
align
be.
it, right?
I
That's
didn't want
basically what
it
you're
to be
saying.
that way. Like I spent a lot of time last year trying to do an in-depth mathematical analysis of, you know, self-modification and the stability of goals under self-modification. And I think I made a lot of progress there. But what I found is you can make more progress mathematically under assumptions of very rich resources. Like when you get closer to superintelligence, it becomes more tractable from a math standpoint. Sort of like how a genetic algorithm is easier to analyze as population size goes to infinity. And the small size problem of like a practical system we can play with right now, there's all these finite size corrections, and it's harder for the math to tell you what's going on. And, Eliezer Yudkowsky's group kind of found the same thing. Like they did a bunch of nice papers about the AXE type stuff, like the case where you're near infinite compute size, right? And you can do more nice theory there, but the nice theory doesn't seem to tell you that much about systems that are just barely big enough to do general intelligence, right? There, it's very messy, and it seems like you're figuring things out through a mix of theory and practice, and that's not satisfying to me intellectually. It just seems to be the real situation.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up stability under self-modification. That's the idea of like, hey, we have this AI and it seems to be talking friendly to us, but when I ask it to modify itself or make another AI, right, program another AI from scratch, it programs this other AI, and all the properties that we thought we gave the original AI, it seems like they aren't preserved the way that we thought in the successor AI. Oh, oops, and by the way, they're super intelligent, right? And so what you're saying is like, oh, I couldn't really get an intellectually satisfying way to convince myself it's going to be stable under self-modification,
Well,
but we're just going to try empirically.
I convinced myself mathematically that I've found nice ways to make systems that will have stable goal systems under self-modification once they're above a certain threshold level of general intelligence and capability. So I did convince myself that once you get to a beneficial superintelligence, it can, with high probability, maintain its beneficial goals under self-modification. What I didn't convince myself of is how to make that provably true at the early stages when you have something that's just barely human level intelligent. Because then it's just harder for the system to model itself. And a simplistic way to look at this argument is if you have something close enough to superintelligence, I mean, it can run a simulation of the relevant swath of the universe and how things would evolve under this or that modification to its code, right? And the closer you come to doing that, the better off you are, right? I can say like, okay, if I zoinked around my hippocampus in this way, let's run a simulation of how Earth will be with my zoinked hippocampus, right? And if I'm smart enough to run that simulation in a passable way, that may not be a guarantee, but it's a very interesting situation to be in, right? But you just need a lot of intelligence and a lot of resources to take that sort of approach. So I think for reasons like that, when you have a super intelligence with enough capability and resources, it may well be able to like trial out tweaks to its algorithm and see if they will indeed violate its goal system before effecting those tweaks. But it's harder to see how to do that for a system that's still at the roughly human scale, just from a purely intellectual or math or algorithm perspective. I mean, but still, you can do a better job or a worse job, right? You can make a system that deploys its best uncertain reasoning engine to try to evaluate how a given modification will impact itself and others before it puts that into effect in its brain. Or you could make a system that doesn't do that, right? Like you could make a system that will trial out a variation of itself in a sandbox for a while before putting it into its main system, or you could not do that, right? So I mean, and in fact, we've dealt with that. We've dealt with that recently. Just to, like with this OmegaCLAW system, we did shift from a system where self-modifications are tried in the fly on the main system to one where it makes a clone of itself and tries out modifications on that clone just to be sure it's not like killing itself with that modification. So it tries out the modification on a clone for a while before moving into the main system. So you can still do things better or worse, even if you don't have the stronger guarantees you could have with a system that's more fully super intelligent.
So to summarize here, right, it's beyond our capabilities right now as human researchers. Nobody's figured this out. How to have a theoretical model where we build this super intelligent AI, or just an AGI that's not even super intelligent yet, let's say. We build it and it's able to modify, it's able to make successors, which we think it's going to be able to, but we haven't figured out the theory of how the successors stably preserve any sort of properties that we care about, because it's so easy in principle for it to just write some other piece of code and we don't like it, but potentially it's too late because the other piece of code is also super intelligent. I think we agree we haven't theoretically locked it down. You mentioned that it can be locked down at the ASI level, right? Eventually, you think it becomes stable, which I actually agree with. I agree that eventually it will become stable, but I think we're both concerned that maybe in the era where it's not stable, the first few versions of it that aren't stable yet, maybe they will stabilize on something that's actually horrible for us, correct?
I think the bottleneck is formalizing the relevant aspects of the human world, actually. I think even LLMs are pretty good at working together with like Lean or other theorem provers to formalize and prove things. And our candidate AGI architectures are concisely formalized in the case of my own work, messily formalized, but still formalizable for transformer neural nets or something. But we don't have a tractable formalization of the human world. So a very interesting research program would be to try to make the best possible formal model of the human and natural world we are dealing with, and then try to do the best case we could of like formalizing the problem of practical AI systems as they modify their goals and see what will happen. But that, again, that's not what the world is doing now. Like even take the much simpler case of making logic formulations of known mathematics. Like we know how to do that now, but there's no Manhattan Project to make a logical formalization of all math, right? Instead, we have VC funded companies that are formalizing math, but keeping it secret for themselves so they can somehow make money from formalized math or something, right? And then say Joseph Urban, a good friend of mine at the AI for Reason Institute in Czechia, he's trying to make an open formalization of all math, and he doesn't have enough money to pay for the server time to run his code to do it, right? And this is just formalizing math, which is much easier than formalizing a model of our whole world. So while we don't have what you described, which is like a rigorous, nailed down understanding of how to make goals preserved under iterated self-modification, I think there are plausible pathways to that. There's a bottleneck there, which is a formalization of the world that the AI is interacting with. That's a tractable thing to work on, but our global economic system is not focusing on it. And much simpler things are not being focused on. Right? Like Steve Omohundro, a good friend of mine, who, if you haven't had on your show, you should. I mean, he wrote the basic AI.
Yeah, I'd love to have him on. He hasn't been on yet.
Yeah, so he's a great guy. He proposed a while ago the idea that a path to AI safety would be replace all of the world's IT infrastructure with formally verifiable software, right? And I mean, then his thinking was, then you could have a narrow AI theorem proving engine, verify that a rogue AI wasn't suddenly forming. Now, I'm not so convinced that's a guarantee against rogue AGI forming. It would, however, be a very good idea for all sorts of reasons, right? And with Mythos and other sorts of LLM cybersecurity risks popping out, it's more and more clear. But my point is, we're not doing that very fast either, right? Like something like formalizing all math or upgrading all of our software infrastructure to formally verifiable software. Like these things are much simpler than formalizing the human world well enough to prove theorems about the goal preservation under self-modification of early stage AGIs. But we're not even doing these much simpler things because we're spending our resources on multiple replicas of ChatGPT and then on controlling killer robots to take part in various asinine wars around the world, right? So, I mean, that's a state of play 2026.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there's low-hanging fruit of things that can make alignment or safety a little bit better, and we're not even doing those. In my mind, I think there's just like the much bigger prize that we're not attacking. But yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with what you just said now. Okay, so we're coming up on 12 p.m. PT. I want to be respectful of your time. I also want to make sure that you can talk about your new projects. So you mentioned OmegaCLAW. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about SingularityNET and OpenBGI. Sound good?
Sounds good. Yeah.
Great. So I know you've already discussed OmegaCLAW, but for the viewers, can you tease us with like a killer use case, right? Or like an exciting use case for OmegaCLAW?
Sure. So actually, let me take a step back and answer a different question, and then I'll answer that one. So that you mentioned a bunch of organizations I'm involved with, which are all important, but at the crux of my AI work are two open source software initiatives, right? And one is Hyperon, which is a framework for sort of neural symbolic evolutionary AI. So not just neural nets, but for a variety of different AI paradigms, including uncertain theorem proving, program evolution, and so on. And we spent the last 3 years building a scalable infrastructure for this, which now basically works. So now we're in the midst of trying to take a couple decades of AGI prototypes and implement them in terms of this scalable infrastructure. And then the other open AGI R&D initiative I'm engaged with is trying to push forward predictive coding as an alternative to backpropagation for training deep neural nets, because I think many of the limitations we see with LLMs and other deep neural nets is because of the backpropagation algorithm, which is the key learning algorithm underlying them. And there are alternatives that have been explored in academia for a while, but just haven't been scaled up. So we have a new framework called Fabric PC, which is sort of like the Torch or TensorFlow for predictive coding training of neural networks, right? So these two open source initiatives, they underlie all the different organizations that you mentioned. So to get to OmegaCLAW now, this really popped up because I saw OpenClaw, I thought it was cool, and I'm like, but this code is a horrible mess. And I mean, it was the first prototype; it's allowed to be. I'm like, we could code this in a couple hundred lines in our AGI language, and it would be much more elegant and beautiful. And then it could modify itself as it goes, which will be quite interesting. So Patrick Hammer, who's one of the AI researchers and developers on SingularityNET's team, he did that implementation based on my initial suggestions and screwing around. And what we realized is that the killer functionality we were adding by putting it in our meta AGI language was memory. Because when you use our atom space like symbolic knowledge graph within a claw type system, it just naturally remembers everything it did and everything you said and why it did everything it did. And having that symbolic memory, which is a memory of what the system was at different points in time, how it changed itself, and all the interactions it had, like having that nice symbolic memory there, it just gives a very different set of behaviors and a very different field in an OpenBGI type system, which is basically an LLM in an agentic loop. And it comes out more like interacting with some weird AI dude rather than just a harness, because it remembers who you are. It remembers all the interactions with you. Remember what it did before and what it fucked up and what it succeeded at. No, this is still a prototype, and we're going to roll out like the first official. I mean, it's in GitHub now. Anyone can play with it, but we're going to roll out the first official developer version in maybe 3 weeks from now or something. But that'll be like a Docker container you can download to run your own machine. I think a really productized version will be around the end of the summer, which is what I would say will be ready for companies to use to customize for their own purposes. But I think even without any new AI bells and whistles added, what this can be, as one example, is like an actual AI personal assistant. Like, I mean, Google Assistant is great. Like, it works on my phone. It does things, but it's not really like a personal assistant that knows who you are and knows what you want and remembers what it did for you last week and can do something today consistent with what it did for you last week, right? And beyond retail applications, what I would like to have is an intelligent artificial research assistant, right? That can help me carry out a systematic research project over time, which involves various different code bases, various research papers, various notes, and that keeps track of all these in its memory and can then think along with me in carrying out different actions. So I think that OmegaCLAW is a suitable infrastructure both for personal assistance with actual persistent memory and understanding of itself and of you and who you are. And then this has implications for research assistance, for coding assistance, and a whole bunch of other applications, right? And that this initially is limited by being based on standard LLMs for a bunch of the capability. We can supplement the LLM with some symbolic reasoning, which we're already doing. We can supplement with some evolutionary learning for more creativity. You can get a certain distance that way. I mean, I think it's likely that to make a real breakthrough to human level AGI, you'll need to upgrade the LLM also, and that's what the predictive coding thrust is about. Like, I think if you could retrain the LLM, or maybe you don't even need to redo the pre-trained model, but if you can retrain the RL part on top of the pre-trained model using predictive coding rather than backprop, you will then get something that can update its weights in real time as part of this OmegaCLAW interaction. And then you'll get a real neural symbolic synergy, right? Where the weights in the LLM are adapting to what the CLAW agent is doing during its interaction with you. And this is interesting. It's the first example in my AGI research career, really, where we built some practical thing, started playing with it, and more capability by far popped out than what I thought I was putting in. And we are piggybacking on LLMs, but it's LLMs put together with symbolic memory and reasoning, put together with the internet that an agentic harness gives you. But then you get more than the sum of the parts, at least subjectively, right? And this is not something that shows up on benchmarks at the moment necessarily, but neither was ChatGPT, right? Like, when ChatGPT popped out, it wasn't the best on any benchmark. It was like second or third best on a lot of benchmarks, but it was plainly super cool. So to get back to the different corporate entities you mentioned, which are not the most interesting thing, but I mean, I've been developing AGI software since 2017 within SingularityNET, and we later merged with a couple other blockchain projects into the ASI Alliance. And our focus there has largely been on building a decentralized infrastructure for AGI, so that once we get to AGI, you can roll it out on a global network of machines without any central owner or controller, which is either necessary and critical for ethical and beneficial AGI, or really scary, depending on how much you trust Trump, Putin, and Xi Jinping, right? And on the other hand, the project, in a way, is now outgrowing this decentralized infrastructure project, which itself is growing wonderfully. And I mean, we're launching a new layer one blockchain, the ASI chain, which uses our meta AGI language as the smart contract language. So that's going great. But we're finding that, we need a lot more compute, we need a lot more human energy. And so we're launching a new project called OpenBGI, for Open Beneficial General Intelligence, which is sort of set up the way I think OpenAI should have been set up. Like, we're setting it up with a for-profit entity, but a non-profit entity. We want each of them to have some money and some people working for them, and we're trying to craft the agreements between them in a way that will not allow, once we do get to AGI, will not allow the non-profit benefit part to be squashed and eliminated. But I mean, I think for-profit is meaningful and valuable, and the business world is building all this amazing technology. But the open and nonprofit aspect also is important and shouldn't be squashed to zero. So OpenBGI will be building Hyperon technology and predictive coding technology to do enterprise applications, and just building out the open source infrastructure. It will be doing all this compatibly with SingularityNET's decentralized infrastructure. So it will be presumably the biggest user of SingularityNET's decentralized infrastructure. But this all has got to be based on open source code. And I think this is the only way we can beat big tech, because while we are going to be raising money for OpenBGI, and SingularityNET already has a flourishing token ecosystem, right? I don't aim to raise more money than Anthropic and OpenAI and all this. What I think is, we need to build, like Linux has done, we need to build a flourishing open source developer community. And we need to get, yes, we'll have server farms, but I mean, we also have software that can leverage the processors on everyone's phone and laptop and pull all this into the global compute network. Because one aspect of
okay, for the viewers, you're talking about OpenBGI. BGI is beneficial AGI, correct?
Beneficial General Intelligence. Yeah. It could have been BAGI, but BAGI seemed like a bad acronym, so
it's not bad. Okay, it's just BGI. Okay. And just a review. You talked about how this is going to be, it's going to use the infrastructure that you've built over the last decade or two with SingularityNET, correct?
Mm-hmm. And Hyperon and our new predictive coding frameworks. Yeah.
And to catch up the viewers, you mentioned there's blockchain projects and it has a flourishing ecosystem. So SingularityNET launched the AGI token in 2017 on Ethereum, and then the token moved to the Cardano chain, and it became AGI X.
It's on Ethereum, Cardano, and Cosmos at the moment, and we will launch our own layer one chain around the end of this year, which is sort of customized for Hyperon AGI technology.
Nice. Okay, yeah, and just go back to 2021. So then the AGI coin on Ethereum and the AGI X coin on Cardano later merged with two other tokens in 2024 to become ASI. So you're already recapitulating the whole AGI to ASI.
I mean, hype goes faster than technology, right? So yeah, building a token called ASI is easier than building the actual ASI. So.
Yep. Okay, great. And on CoinMarketCap, as of today, the market cap of ASI is $541 million. How does the token price support the research your team is doing?
Oh, well, I mean, we can incentivize development with tokens, right? So, I mean, we have a stockpile of tokens that we reserved for development funds when we did the initial coin offering, and we can use those tokens to compensate developers who build code that runs on the platform.
Gotcha. Okay, but as you mentioned, now you're kind of continuing along the lines of crypto plus AI because you're going to have a new layer one chain and it's going to benefit from the Hyperon architecture. Just making sure.
The new layer one should allow quite a lot, because if we deploy early stage AGI systems on this layer one chain, right, then let's say someone gets a subscription to an OpenBGI based system, similar to what they do to a ChatGPT system now, right? So it will probably be focused more on higher level professional accounts. So say someone pays $500 a month to access an OpenBGI interactive system to help them with coding, math, research, business strategy, right? And then this system will be running in the back end largely on the ASI chain. So even if someone paid for that subscription in dollars, on the back end, it will be converted to the ASI tokens. So then you have massive token utility with that ASI token, right? So you have a flourishing ASI tokenomic ecosystem behind the scenes, right? And that I think that even if end users are paying in fiat currency for a subscription, if you have an agent economy behind the scenes, where someone is paying a subscription for one agent, but then the agent pays some money for an other agent, which pays some money for another agent, these inter-agent transactions can be done using the ASI token, which is sort of what it was built for. And when we launched this project in 2017, the notion of an inter-agent economy was kind of fanciful and nobody paid much attention to it. But now, I mean, everyone accepts that the future of the economy is AI agents paying AI agents, right? But we have a nice infrastructure for that. We've had for a while, and it will be massively upgraded with the ASI chain launch toward the end of the year.
Nice. Okay, great. Yeah, well, that's all extremely fascinating. I encourage viewers to dive into that. I forgot to ask when you were talking about the Mindplex and kind of co-evolving with AIs or socializing them, right? Adapting to them. I feel like you talk a lot about that. Have you looked into softmax? Do you think your view is similar to those guys?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely recommend checking out softmax.com because I'm just noticing a lot of similarities in both of your general approaches. And softmax, I think they have Ken Stanley as an advisor, and they have Emmett Shear.
So I know Ken Stanley reasonably well, and his work on the NEAT and so forth is great. He's working for a different company now, right? Like Lila Biosciences or something, right? He's
Yeah. With Ken Stanley, I just saw him as one of the advisors, so I don't know the details there, but I think, and they've also mentioned they've been inspired by his writing. And by the way, also, if viewers search Doom Debates Ken Stanley, he actually came on the show and we had a really great debate.
No, he's great. I mean, from the name softmax, I would assume they're neural net focused, whereas my technical approach puts neural nets together with logical inference, evolutionary learning, and other methods in an integrated architecture, rather than being solely neural. Because I mean, of course, softmax is a function used inside artificial neurons. But I will check out that project. It's an amazing time when there's more cool AI projects out there than I can keep up with, right?
That's right, because you certainly were around before that was the case.
Yeah.
Ben Goertzel, you're such a fascinating guy, and I really appreciate that you came on the show to have this discussion. Talking to people like you is really why I started Doom Debates. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.